Alright, welcome back. In this video, we're going to review all of the required documents, so let's get right to it. Alright, so let's start at the beginning, the Declaration of Independence. So this document has basically three things that we want to focus on. It talks about natural rights, popular sovereignty, and the social contract. So we're probably already familiar with that phrase that Jefferson says that all men are created equal. And then he goes on to say that people have certain unalienable rights. He means natural rights. These are rights that can't be taken away from us, things that we have simply by virtue of being born, by being human, we have these rights. And he says among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then he goes on to bring in the other two ideas of popular sovereignty and social contract. He says that the purpose of government is to protect those rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a social contract, telling us the purpose of government. And then he tells us who establishes governments. He says about the consent of the governed, and that the people form governments. That's popular sovereignty, the idea that people are the source of governmental power. So right there in the Declaration, we have three of the most fundamental ideas to American government. Okay, so not long after that, we get the Articles of Confederation. And one of the main ideas here is that states wanted to keep and maintain their sovereignty. They needed to make sure that they were stronger than this new national government that they were forming, so they very intentionally created a very weak national government. For example, this new national government only had one branch, just Congress. There was no executive branch, there was no judicial branch. And one of the fundamental weaknesses of this new government was that it lacked the ability to tax. Again, this was on purpose. States did not trust giving power to this new national government. They wanted to maintain that power for themselves. So states are still allowed to do things like making their own currency. They could impose tariffs on other states. They could ignore federal treaties. Again, these things should show that the real power under the Articles was held by the states. Now again, Congress did have some power, so they could raise an army, they could declare war, they could coin and borrow money, but without that power to tax, they were really left subservient to the states, and again, that's just how the states wanted it. But now we move ahead another decade or so, and we get to the U.S. Constitution, and specifically the debate over that Constitution. So we have Federalist papers being written in support of the new Constitution, and we have anti-Federalist papers like Brutus #1 being written in opposition to the new Constitution. So we're going to consider 4 Federalist papers and 1 anti-Federalist paper. Okay, so let's start with Brutus #1. Brutus is an argument against ratifying the Constitution. Instead of having power at the national government centralized, far away, he prefers power to be held locally, a more democratic government where people have more direct say on policy. Now there are a couple things that really frighten Brutus about this new Constitution. One thing he strongly opposes is the necessary and proper clause. He argues that this will give Congress unlimited and uncontrollable power, that they can decide essentially that anything is necessary and proper, and that will allow them to make any law that they want. A second clause he didn't like was the Supremacy Clause. Now the Supremacy Clause says that when the state law and a federal law come into conflict, the federal law is superior, or it supersedes, it trumps the state law. And Brutus again found this to be a really bad idea because remember, he wanted power made at the state and local level. He wanted states to be able to do what they wanted, and this goes directly against that. He thought this was way too much power for the federal government to have. Along with that, the new federal government, Congress specifically, would be allowed to tax. To Brutus, this was no small thing. He said that the power to tax is the great engine of tyranny. He thought that they could oppress and tyrannize the citizens and essentially stamp out the state governments because they could tax so oppressively that there would be nothing left for states to deal with. So to say that he was against Congress's power to tax is quite an understatement. He also is worried about the idea of a standing army. He says the president's going to have this standing army at his disposal. Again, that will lead to the destruction of liberty and freedom among the individual citizens. He makes a rather dramatic prediction, which is that through that Supremacy Clause, through that power to tax, and through having standing armies, the federal government will soon trample and completely destroy state governments. He says there won't be state governments in the future. They'll just be gotten rid of because they're going to be an annoyance to the federal government, so they'll just get rid of them using those powers that the Constitution is giving them. So what is Brutus's solution? Well, he prefers democracy, but he says a republic can work, it just needs to be a small republic, state and local level, where people have a lot of control and a lot of say and can check the power of their representatives. Okay, so let's move on to Federalist #10. Federalist #10 is all about factions. Madison views factions as the biggest threat to this new republic. So what is a faction? Madison defines factions as being groups of citizens, and the type that he's worried about are groups of citizens that have interests that are adverse to the rights of other citizens. Now, one of the important things to point out right away is that Madison did not believe that democracies could suitably handle or control the negative effects of factions. And the reason for that is that a democracy, you just vote. And so if there's a big enough group and that group has more people and they have a desire that is adverse to the rights of others, well, they vote and the majority wins. Therefore, they can trample the rights of minorities simply by virtue of outvoting them. So to Madison, democracy is not a solution to this problem. So he runs through different ideas. Can we get rid of factions? And he says the answer is no. Factions are natural, so you can't get rid of them. So if factions are natural and you can't get rid of them, then what's the solution? Well, Madison says you have to control the negative effects. And his answer is that we need to have a large republic. He says that a large republic is the best way to control the negative effects of factions and to maintain majority rule with minority rights. Okay, so we got the idea that Madison likes republics, doesn't like democracy, but the question stands, why a large republic? Why can't smaller republics work as well? And here Madison has a creative answer, which is that the larger the republic, the more factions we'll have. And this is actually the solution. He says by having so many different factions, you have so many people in many different factions, it'll be much less likely that any one single faction will form a majority, and it will thus be rendered unable to oppress smaller minority factions and minority groups. So again, the main idea of Federalist 10 is that a large republic is the best way to control the negative effects of factions. Federalist number 51 is all about separation of powers and checks and balances. In this essay, Madison famously states that if men were angels, no government would be necessary. Now, his point in saying that is that we need government because men are in fact not angels, not perfect, but the people who are going to be in that government aren't angels either. So while it's true that we might need a government, we also need to control the power of the people within that government. So his solution is separation of powers and checks and balances. Separation of powers refers to taking the jobs of the federal government and dividing them into 3 branches, giving each branch their own job, their own power. Now he goes beyond this and he says, all right, but now ambition must be made to counteract ambition. So he knows that each branch, the people within that branch, are going to want to increase their own power. They're also going to jealously guard the power that they have, and they're going to try to prevent the other branches from taking that power from them. So he says, give each of them a little bit of power and influence over the other branches. That's checks and balances. And he says by doing this, they will ensure that no other branch gets too much power because they want to make sure that they don't lose their own power. So in Federalist number 70, Hamilton is here arguing in favor of a unitary executive. This means the power of the presidency should be held by a single person rather than having like a council or a group holding that power together. Now, at first, this might sound really strange, because isn't the whole point of the Constitution to make sure that no one person or group has too much power? So why give all that power to one person? Well, for one thing, Hamilton says that it'll be more efficient and it'll be more effective. It'll be able to respond faster in moments of crisis than a group would. A group would bicker, they would fight with each other, they would debate. But are we sure that we want the president acting fast? Well, here Hamilton says yes. He says that while it is good for Congress to be slow and deliberative, remember that long process we have of making a bill? He says that's fine. They should be slow because lawmaking, that's the real power. He says, but once that law is made, you need somebody who can enforce it and enact it quickly and can respond, especially in emergencies and moments of crisis. So he says the solution is to have a unitary executive. But Hamilton doesn't stop with the efficiency argument. He says that actually public opinion will have more power over a single president than it would over a council or a group. And the reason for this, he says, is because when things are going badly, people will know exactly who to blame and who to hold accountable. When things are going well, they'll know who to give credit for. He says if there were a council, they would be pointing fingers at each other and the people would never really know who is doing a good job and who is doing a poor job. Therefore, public opinion wouldn't be as effective a check on a group as it is against a single person. So not only is it more effective and more efficient, but it actually causes the president to be more accountable to the people. Federalist number 78 is all about an independent judiciary. So Hamilton here is arguing that the judicial branch needs to be independent of the other 2 branches. The judicial branch needs to be able to freely use their power of judicial review, to rule on the constitutionality of laws made by Congress and actions of the president. So by having this job for life, by having the guarantee that their pay can't be cut or reduced based on their rulings, judges can now focus on ruling the proper way on protecting the Constitution, protecting the rights of citizens from those other two branches. And he says that wouldn't be possible if they were reliant on Congress and the president for their job security. Now maybe you're thinking, well, that's a lot of power because now there's no check on them because they can't lose their jobs or have their pay cut. And there's a little bit of truth to that, obviously. But what Hamilton argues is that the judicial branch is beyond comparison the weakest branch of government. He says that they have neither force nor will. So unlike Congress, who has the will of the people, the democratically elected branch, unlike the president, who has the power of force, he can execute laws, he's commander-in-chief, he has an army, he says that all the judicial branch has is merely judgment. All they can do is say something. They can just rule that something is right or wrong. And it doesn't stop there. They only have judgment. They can't even enforce their own rulings. They rely on the president or state and local governments, others, to enforce their rulings for them. So he says they are beyond a doubt the weakest branch, so don't worry that they have this job for life. They can't take away your liberty and oppress you anyway. And finally, we have a letter from Birmingham Jail. And we can view this document as a demand for the fulfillment of those founding documents. So Martin Luther King Jr. here is arguing that those words in those founding documents, they're beautiful, they're nice words. All men created equal. The preamble of the Constitution saying we the people. And the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, which guarantees that states cannot deprive any citizen of their equal protection under law. He says those words are great, but make it happen now. He is demanding the fulfillment of those words, demanding that they become more inclusive and that all Americans are part of that we the people. Elsewhere within this document, he defends the tactics of the civil rights movement. He argues forcefully in favor of civil disobedience. This is when a person intentionally breaks the law. He's saying that these pro-segregation Jim Crow laws, that they are immoral, that they violate the natural rights of men, and therefore you do not have to follow them. In fact, he says that an unjust law is no law at all. Therefore, citizens not only can break these laws, but they actually have a duty or an obligation to not follow a law that goes against a person's natural rights. All right, so there it is, all your required documents. If you need more specifics on any of these individual ones, you know I have videos for you. Till next time, this has been a LaMoney production. Thanks again for watching this video. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for me if you haven't already. Check out the Ultimate Review Packet. It has a practice multiple choice test, has a ton of great study guides, good content for you guys, everything you need to get ready for that exam. See you next time.